to be busy when I'm sitting.
All right, we're rolling.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. This is our first here at St. Anne, inaugural Friends, Food, and Faith. So this is more of a guided topic of the whys of the faith more than the whats. I mean, as we're talking about faith formation, evangelization, kind of the goal of all things new is to make disciples. Missionary disciples go out and profess the faith, right? So evangelize. And so this is really what this is directed towards. It's not to say they can't, especially with Bob the Fathers, which is going to happen every other week. I can't say it can be more open, but this is more directed tonight, right? So we're going to start with liturgical music. So let's go ahead and begin with a prayer. In the name of Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Mighty Fathers, who come here tonight to learn more about your will in the liturgy, your will for your church. Fill us with the grace to be open, to receptive to what we are about to receive. We ask this through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So, of course, we also bring food, which is always great. Tonight we're going to talk about liturgical music, more about why are certain songs picked over maybe others. I mean, sometimes the big point of contention may be like, hey, I heard this great song on Joy FM. Great. Why don't we use that in the Mass? Maybe. Usually no. And we're going to kind of talk about that tonight as far as like what the big difference may be between liturgical music properly and other music which could be very good devotionally or be good for like maybe fostering your own personal prayer, but may not be proper to the liturgy. And when we talk about these things in liturgy, that it's not like there's certain things that are restricted, right, that should not be brought in. Like for instance, the words of institution of the Eucharist, right? You can't change those. I can't say like, hey, that stuff, that's my body, sure, whatever. That doesn't work, right? It has
got to be the words.
It has to be the words, right?
Okay.
And so otherwise, though, there are certain options within liturgy that can be allowed or adapted. The church kind of remains saying certain openness to things. But what's interesting is, after Vatican II, there were certain governing documents that were put out there, specifically a document called Sacrosanctum Concilium, which is really just Latin for the Sacred Council, right? And so the documents always start with the first words of the sentence.
Oh.
So whenever you get a document that comes out from the Vatican or from ecumenical councils, it's always going to be in Latin, but it's always going to be the first words of that particular document, right? So Sacrosanctum Concilium was really directed towards the liturgy because after Vatican II, there was sort of a shift in the liturgy from what was done 500 years prior to that to what was kind of developed and established in the 1970s, right? So before Vatican II, Mass was in Latin. It was it was always celebrated what they call ad orientem, which means towards the east, towards the tabernacle. And music was sort of more of an accompaniment to the Mass. So, for instance, you maybe heard like these great works from Bach, these masses that like Bach or Beethoven would write. Those were written for the Mass. And what would happen is while the Mass is being celebrated, this music just be played throughout the entire thing.
Oh, they would even play it during
Right,
the prayers and everything.
Because the liturgy at that time was really kind of more focused on what's happening in the sanctuary. So if anyone were to go to a Mass, what they call the extraordinary Mass or the traditional Latin Mass, the Mass before 1970, there's not a lot of dialogue between the priests and the congregation, right? All the dialogue's happening in the sanctuary between the ministers. And while that was going on, because the people, we just want them engaged, right? What ended up happening, a lot of people started praying the rosaries or doing other things or having their own devotionals, which, okay, but it was kind of taking away what was actually going on in the Mass. And to accompany those things, there was usually these beautiful hymns and masses written to kind of accompany that, to kind of elevate the senses to what was actually going on. That was the purpose. In the early 20th century, there was sort of this kind of shift in saying, okay, well, it seems like a lot of people coming to Mass, good, faithful Catholics, are not engaging. And Pius X was the one that kind of coined this phrase called active participation. And so all throughout history, the Mass has been directed toward this thing called active participation. Now, what that actually is maybe different than what we think it is, right? So We had some training a few weeks back for ministers, for lectors and story ministers, and in that we kind of discussed about, if this ministry is taking you away from actually participating in the Mass, and what that means is praying, having an internal disposition towards what's going on, being focused on the sacrifice that's happening that Jesus is doing, right? We shouldn't do that then. We shouldn't actually be in this ministry, because that's going to take us away from what actually we should be focused on in the Mass, right? And so what tended to happen was, over time, that active participation kind of faded in the Mass. And so Pius X wanted to start reforms of the liturgy to kind of get people more involved, not necessarily like engaging with like ministries or even like, even have the dialogue in the Mass, but to try to kind of have like this active participation interiorly and be focused on what's happening. Now, it was often thought that Vatican II would have been called by Pius X, but what ended up happening was, well, you had these things that were happening in Europe, specifically World War I, and then World War II, and then the Korean. So there were these kind of interruptions that were happening. The same thing actually happened during Vatican I. So Vatican I actually was actually called short because this guy named Napoleon was kind of causing a lot of havoc.
That was in the 1800s.
1850s, yeah. So the big thing came out of Vatican I was papal infallibility, right? That was the big thing. So Vatican II, it also it used that same phrase in Sancro Sanctum Concilium and defined it as, again, this internal disposition to prayer to kind of elevate our senses to the sacrifice of what's happening in the Mass. And the new Mass that came from Vatican II, even though it's not really all that dissimilar from the old Mass, it was more engaging in our words and in our actions towards what's actually happening, right? So in that respect, it was actually a good. It was kind of a way to help people to engage more in what's happening, right? With that change, there was also change in the vernacular. There was change in the orientation of the priest. Again, it wasn't. It was allowable. It's not necessarily defined. So, in other words, Vatican II never said, "Hey, the priest should always be facing the people." It said the priest can face the people, and the Vatican II never really said, "Hey, we should only use the vernacular in the Mass." You can use the vernacular.
When you say vernacular, you mean the language.
The language of the actual people where you are.
English.
Right, exactly.
Okay, just.
One of the things that was kind of funny about that was nowhere in the documents of Vatican II will you find where it says the altar should be freestanding away from the tabernacle.
Oh.
But almost every church today has that, right?
Yeah,
right. Now, part of that is innovation, interpretation. So there's a canonical law that says that what's called MOS, M-O-S, which is actually translated into custom, that says that if something's been known by the local ordinary for more than 35 years in a particular parish, it becomes kind of canon law. But again, canon laws are allowable. It's not necessarily like, they can't restrict, they can only allow.
Okay.
Right? So that's happened for more than 35 years. All the bishops of the world know about it. So, okay, fine. It kind of becomes part of what happens. Part of that, though, is also the music, right? So, okay, well, for, at this point, centuries, the organ was really primarily used. I mean, there'd be other instruments used, like maybe flute or harp or, anything like that. Even going back to the Old Testament, you hear things about like cymbals and drums and things that were done in the Old Testament. Again, allowed. But then as modern invention comes into play, there's certain questions about, well, what can we actually bring in? Like, what about a guitar? Yeah. Okay. What about a piano? So again, there's these kind of open questions that were kind of left up to interpretation, kind of left open when it came to that. The governing, like I said, Sacro Sanctum was kind of the governing document, and then what it kind of said in that document was organ was like pride of place, and chant was very much elevated to be something that was even done before 1970. What ended up happening after Vatican II, and some of us are probably around after that happened, more so than I was. There were certain kind of innovations that were being done, right? And part of that maybe was not just okay, well, okay, we're kind of doing things differently now. What can be allowed, what can't be allowed, right? And the church really was trying to like observe and try to get some understanding before she actually made any definitive comments. So flash forward now to 2020. The USCCB produced this document, which is the Catholic Hymnody at the Service of the Church, an aid for evaluating hymn lyrics. Now, this is specifically talking about lyrics, right?
I was gonna say, you're not talking about the music, you're
Right.
talking about the actual words.
But this is really something was kind of surprising because, before that, I mean, there's always been this understanding that the lyrics should be beautiful. They should be theologically sound, meaning in line with Catholic doctrine. And the music also should be something that's enlivening and lifting to what's actually happening in the Mass, right? So those are kind of the main guidelines for it. Like in here, they talk about specific examples, and some of these may be, I don't know, cause some strife for people, right? Because it actually mentions specific hymns that really shouldn't be used because of the hymn of the actual lyrics that are used, right? For instance, it says in here, one that I kind of grew up with, and I tell you the truth, I never really liked all that much. Lord of the Dance. So I dance in the morning.
Yeah.
So under the what it says here, incorrect views of the Jewish people.
Oh,
Right. So part of these headlines, these headings here that they kind of say should be taken consideration. There's kind of about 6 of them, and just kind of briefly kind of go over what those are. There is, sorry, I probably should have done this a little better. The deficiency of the presentation of the Eucharistic doctrine, right? So lyrics that kind of diminish what the Eucharist is, right? Maybe instead of calling it the body and blood of Jesus, calling it bread and wine.
Calling it a meal.
Right, a meal instead of a
Okay.
sacrifice. Poetic license should conform to customary usage of scripture and liturgical tradition. Bread of life, instead are scriptural synecdoches for the Eucharist itself, and so are permitted. However, wine is not used in the same way, and to call the consecrated element wine gives the impression that it's still wine, right? So some of those things, examples, God is here as we his people. This hymn speaks of symbols to remind us of our lifelong need of grace. We hear that as bread and wine are taken, Christ sustains us as of old. Bread and wine are still bread and wine, not the body and blood, right? Now in this banquet, I'm not really sure. I've never really heard of that one. I don't know. Do you know that one at all?
Not off the top of my head.
Yeah, okay. All are welcome,
Oh my gosh.
right? Because what that kind of implies is, well, hey, anyone can come up and receive the Eucharist, right?
that's a good point.
Well, if you meet certain criteria, sure.
Grade school in the 70s, we did Kumbaya.
Yep.
Kumbaya.
Let it be.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, kumbaya, but I mean, let it be, and that's the thing. Those may be examples of, well, what is the theological advantage there,
Yeah.
right? Deficiencies in the presentation of Trinitarian doctrine, right? So avoiding language that implies God has parts, because God doesn't have parts; He has persons, right? If you were to remove one person, the Trinity the God doesn't exist. When you read the unitive aspect, the persons don't exist. So mixed words that designate relations, i.e. that designate the persons who are distinct in relation only, right? So in other words, they're just related by Father, Son, Holy Spirit, right? They're not actually like share a unity in that respect, in essence. Like for instance, Creator can apply to all 3 persons, while Father and Son apply uniquely to the 2 persons designated by these relational names. You actually saw this too. There was a big controversy happened when it comes to baptism. So there was a time, unfortunately, where certain clerics were using the Creator, the Redeemer, and the Sanctifier instead of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Oh,
Now, the problem with that is that's not Trinitarian. And that would not be a valid sacrament because those terms were used,
doesn't make sense, yeah.
right?
It was valid, not just illicit.
Right, valid, right. So they use the example of the play of the Godhead. I'm not really sure about that one either.
No.
Yeah, some of these I haven't heard, so maybe that's a good sign. I don't know, but The third aspect they talk about hymns with deficiencies in the doctrine of God and his relation to humans. So, for instance, they use God beyond all names. I would also think like maybe singing a church in a bean would also be another one of those examples, right? Which is, some people like that song, but it also indicates that we have a say on bringing the church into existence.
Okay.
When the only person really do that is God.
It's summoned by the God who made us. That's the one you're talking about.
Right,
In our
right,
diversity,
right.
Let us bring the gifts that differ.
Yeah. So actually, they use that as the next one. So hymns with a view of the church that sees her as essentially a human construction,
Oh.
and that would be like so sing a new church,
Right.
right? Yeah. So like I said, there's a lot of these things. So the fifth one would be hymns that doctrinally incorrect views of the Jewish people. And really, since Vatican II, that's really been an emphasis of the council to not look as our Jewish brothers and sisters as those that killed Jesus, because we all did that. Yeah. But actually, look at them as they're the source of where Jesus came from. They were the people, right? They were God's people
So he
even
came
today.
I mean, that was his
Right.
original, yeah.
Right. And then, of course, hymns with incorrect Christian anthropology. So anthropology just means like the study of understanding of man in the presence of God, right? So it uses here the canticle of the Son. Praised for our death that makes our life real. The knowledge of loss that helps us to feel. Death is the punishment of original sin, right? Death is not something that should be, championed in many ways, right? And that seems what it kind of does, right? So that's kind of what the outlines. It also has some other appendices here from Archbishop Buchlein. And he talks about the 10 common deficiencies in catechetical material. So that kind of goes in line, but it's also more of a broader topic, right? So the reason that we use what we use specifically at the Mass is because it does meet these criteria, right? It's in line with Catholic understanding of the Eucharist, the Trinity, the Church, and we as people of God, primarily, right? Do you have anything to add there, Mike?
So in an earlier document, just talking again on the topic of like why pick what music you do, there's an earlier document that the bishops put out called Sing to the Lord, which was 2007, which as it happens was sort of around the time I think they were at least working on the new translation of the Missal. Mm-hmm. So I think there was sort of an interest in seeing what not only the liturgical books say, but the documents that say what is proper to the liturgy say. So Sing to the Lord was citing things like Sanctorum Concilium and the general instruction of the Roman Missal, which is sort of the general instruction of the Roman Missal is sort of the rules that we're operating on right now, post Vatican II, for establishing for saying, what do we do in a Mass, basically.
It's also known as the germ.
Right, the germ. Right,
so that's
and you can find it on the bishop's website or the Vatican website. It's easy to find, easy to read, and they were a little more general, as Father Mark said. This document's rather striking because it calls out specific songs. Yeah. They were a little more general in Sing to the Lord, but they have some pretty good guidelines about what music, what should we think about when we're actually picking music, and they talk about.
Did this just come out? I'm sorry.
This came out in 2020.
2020.
Yeah.
Yes, fairly recently.
Yeah.
Sing to the Lord is 2007, as I said, and was referring to even older documents from the 1960s, among other things. Anyway, they had sort of three categories of guidelines, and they said, and it's sort of as questions, and you could say, is it pastoral, is it liturgical, and is it musical?
Yeah.
And so the liturgical one might be the easiest one, which is does it I think the phrase they use is, does it support the ritual action, right? And that can mean, particularly if during communion, does the song support what's going on? Is it suitable for communion?
It's like Kumbaya or
right.
Let It Be.
Right. But also, is it suitable scripturally, doctrinally, the sort of things they're talking about in this document that's being passed around in particular. And then musical is like it's more than, you know, well, do we like it? It's about like there's a certain subjectivity to it, I guess, in the matter of taste, and they say that it's not that certain genres or certain types of music are verboten, but I think they say something about avoiding like the trite cliches of popular music and things like that. Things that would musically would take you out of what's happening liturgically.
To that point, I mean, and that's I think the thing we have to keep in mind here is that the Mass is different than anything else we hear.
Yeah.
And it should be, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
you shouldn't really be, you know, you shouldn't like think I'm going to Mass and going to a rock concert.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's a different thing in kind. And when we talk about music, like the musical aspect of it, there are different genres that would be appropriate for a rock concert or even for like personal devotion, you know, but aren't proper because of the musical makeup for the liturgy.
You know, the thing keeps bouncing through my head, listening to you guys talking, especially about, you know, now that you're pointing out some of these lines in the songs. You know, we're also used to being entertained.
Right.
And I think everybody thinks that the music at church should be entertaining.
Yeah.
You know, I gotta like the song, and I don't know that people worry so much about the the wordage. They want something with a rhythm or a
It's the
beat or
melody,
something,
yeah,
you know,
right,
and because, and I guess in one respect, that kind of and especially in the last 20 or 30 years, the influx of all this, you mentioned Joy, the radio station, you know, and people listen to that, that's modified you know, I mean, I'm not saying those are bad songs. I listen to it sometimes and I enjoy the heck out of it.
Yeah.
But
That's more praise and worship than it
well,
is
and
liturgy.
I think we've also, as Catholics even, gotten some of our music mixed up with Protestants.
Sure,
You know, the number one thing that I see about these mega churches, you know, the one I've been most familiar with for so long has been Grace out there in Maryland Heights. Okay, you know, they've been around for 40 years. But if you've ever been in there, I mean, those guys, they entertain you. I mean, you know, they got the best sound systems, the best, you know, and so I think for a lot of people, that's what even Catholics have said, well, why can't our masses be more entertaining? You know, and it's like, this is not entertainment. It's prayer. You
Right.
know,
It's not the dimension that we should be thinking about
You know.
any aspect of the liturgy.
To that point, Mike, there's a great song. I love it. It's called "Reckless Love."
Oh, I know what you.
It emotes something for me every
Yeah.
single time I hear it. But the question I would have is, where would I put that in the liturgy? You know, like where would I mean,
Yeah, it doesn't.
it doesn't really fit a lot of time.
No,
I mean, you could say like, well, the love of God. I mean, well, yeah, but what specifically do we look at in the liturgy that can actually apply to and coincide with?
We did a program at Trinity back around 4, 5, 6 that was called Christ Renews His Parish, it's kind of a self-led kind of a deal. We had great luck. I mean, we had lots of parishioners come to it, and it actually had bear some really good fruit. And we had some conflicts. You know, Father would come in and say, you know, guys, I'm great. You guys are bringing 25 guys in these retreats, but some of the music, you know, and one of the deals was if you did a witness as a member of the team, you had a song that they would play before your witness or whatever. And some of them got pretty, you know, and Father started having to look at some of them and go, hey guys, come on, we got to remember we're a Catholic church here, you know.
To that point, I was in so Acts is something
Okay,
that
say,
came out
yeah.
of church, right?
Runs along the same lines.
Castillo kind of
Yeah,
deal, right?
right,
So
right.
it's sleigh led, and the first time I went on an Acts retreat, I know there's a river roll, but I'm not going to go into detail. But one of the events, they were playing "Mary, Did You Know?" Now it wasn't liturgical, it wasn't but okay, but theologically speaking, there's a problem with that song.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful song.
Yeah, but
did Mary? Yeah, she did.
She
Of course
did,
she did, right? Yeah, she had to, right?
yeah, you're kind of
Whole part of the gospel of Luke.
right.
Yeah.
So I mean, and that's kind of I think the struggle is because you have to kind of make a differentiation between, okay, is this proper for what's happening here? Can it be in the Mass?
Yeah.
Right, and that's the thing. I mean, even like some of the instruments that are used, right? Well, is that really proper? Right, and that's the other word that's all we're kind of talking about too, right? Is not necessarily is it right or wrong, or is it allowed or not allowed? Is it proper?
Yeah.
That's really the main.
I mean,
thing
people
that
are
we look at.
using it, but is it,
Right.
should it be
Right.
used?
Right.
And yeah, well, I was gonna ask you just a question, this isn't exactly a musical question. So, Vatican II wasn't instituted until 70? The reason I'm asking is,
Vatican II was they ended in 1965.
okay, cause I'm going back to when I was a kid, and I grew
Yeah.
up here,
Right.
and I'm thinking, because when I was a server, I started serving in 5th
Mhm.
grade, so I was born in 57, so I
Mhm.
would've started serving when I was 10.
Mhm.
We weren't doing Latin when I started serving.
Yeah. So yes. Okay. Good.
Was
so,
Latin like the first thing to go away?
pretty much.
Okay,
So,
so-
1970 is when the actual rubrics.
Okay.
So actually,
but,
like the new mass actually.
but
was
before
established.
that, people
So
were.
we had a in St. Louis is kind of unique because we had certain people who were kind of instrumental in the liturgical change in the with Vatican
really?
II.
Okay.
And one of those people that were very significant, his name was Monsignor Hellriegel. And he was the pastor at Our Lady of the Cross in Baden.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And he was very instrumental in kind of developing
The
the new mass, right? And so part of that was, and again, the understanding there was that even Sacrosanctum Concilium says that vernacular can be used. What the intention was that people had to actually understand what's happening, because you're implementing kind of a new thing that's happening here, right? So I mean, it's not like completely the same as like the old mass, but there are certain changes that it would be helpful if people know what's going on.
Yeah.
And so the intention was, let's use the vernacular so people understand what's going on. But everywhere in there, it always says Latin's a mother tongue. Latin should have pride of place. Latin, Latin, Latin. And the intention, I think, somewhat like the music, when we talk about, even the music, the intention was that these traditions that we've had for millennia at this point should still be, maintained and kept. And so to that point, when people understand what's happening in the Mass, well, great.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the Latin tongue, right? I mean, even in Sacrosanctum Concilium talking about the liturgical music, organ, chant, these are things that have been deposits of faith and treasures of the church for generations now. So we should still uphold them and use them.
I always think of it as, small c Catholic means or the concept of small c Catholicity, which basically means the universality of the church, right? And so that's a connection not only to our brothers and sisters in Christ in the present day around the world, but also those who came before us in the past. And I think maintaining those traditions, those treasures of the church, like chant and other forms of religious art and liturgical art, is a bridge to those that came before us, and that's true of Latin, and that's true of chant, and that's true of many other aspects.
Yeah, one thing
So
Mike.
to that end, though, this might be a bother the father question, but with Vatican II, whatever happened to the no eating meat on Friday? That's still a thing.
That is still a thing.
It is still a thing. I did not know
So
that
what-
until my until
Well,
recently.
So what came out of Vatican II was, again, we're talking about allowances rather than actually restrictions, right? So Vatican II was novel in the fact that there were, like at the end of Vatican II, usually whenever there's a document promulgated, they would always end with these what they call anathemas, right? So anathema just means you're not a part, right? You're separated. So like for instance, out of Trent would come an anathema that says that anyone who professes that the Eucharist is not the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, let him be anathema, right? He is not part of us, right? He's different, right? He's a heretic, basically, right? Vatican II didn't do that. Vatican II is much more pastoral in nature. And so what Vatican II was kind of more looking at allowances rather than restrictions and saying you are not. It's like, here's how we can still engage with not only culture, but also like, the time, maintaining our Catholic identity, our Catholic tradition, and engage. And so what Vatican II said was, these practices of not eating meat on Friday are good penances because it's really reflective of not only of Good Friday, that, that's where we commemorate the death of Jesus, right? And so if Jesus can go through the sacrifice he made, maybe we making you refrain from having hamburger that day, right?
No,
Now, there's other, theologically speaking and practically speaking, there's always, so whenever we look at these things, there's always a theological and a practical aspect, right? So theologically, okay, well, the first disciples were fishermen, right? So we're kind of engaging with that in some way.
yeah, that's,
More practically speaking, though, fish was actually a common food, right? For up until recently, really, to have like meat, especially in like, the third world, or
yeah,
even now
it
the third
was-
world,
yeah.
that was unheard of,
Yeah, it
right?
really was
So
a- yeah,
you have to
right.
be very rich in order to actually have some
I
kind
mean,
of
you
meat.
still have all your countries over in the Far East
Right.
that literally still live off of fish. I
Right.
mean,
Well, but see, that's the thing is anyone can go take a pole and go catch a fish, though.
yeah, you're right.
Right. So in a way, it's actually it makes us all kind of equal in God's eyes.
Yeah.
Right. And we can all have fish. Nothing wrong with that, right? So that was more the aspect of why the church did what she did with that. Now, when the document came out, what it basically said was, okay, look, because this is penitential, if you want to do some other form of penance on Friday.
Yeah, but that's what the missed teaching.
Exactly.
Oh, so in
So-
other words.
So you are supposed to abstain
That's
from
one
meat.
form, but
Right,
You-
but
you-
you know, I mean, and the thing is, it kind of left it up to your own conscience to determine what that would be. So let's say you get caught off in traffic, and instead of cursing them out, you say, "I'm going to pray for that person." Great, have a cheeseburger, right? Cool,
Right.
whatever.
But
So
that-
that's kind of what came out of Vatican II is this allowance to say, okay, well, look, because there's a form of penance involved with this, you don't necessarily have to do that as a penance on Friday, but just do some other form of penance.
still do a penance.
Yes.
And I think in that people missed,
Oh, sure they did.
because it wasn't organized like,
Sure.
everybody that was Catholic grew up doing, you knew.
Well, and I think at the heart of
Yeah.
all these discussions, I think, is a difference between what Vatican II actually stated and what the spirit of Vatican II was. And maybe just to briefly go into some aspects of Vatican II that may have been different than previous past ecumenical councils, right? So, for instance, Vatican II was the first time where you had like TV cameras there at the Sistine Chapel.
Never-
That was kind of, hey, these bishops are talking about these things, let's record them, we'll put it on the evening news. So every night you were hearing like, oh, this bishop was talking about priestly celibacy. Oh, well, that's interesting. Oh, this bishop was talking about using vernacular instead of using Latin. Oh.
So these are things people had never heard before.
Right.
Like,
Well, not only that, but just because a bishop was talking about it or was being discussed on the floor doesn't mean that it was
you were
promulgated.
changing the rule.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
But I think what happened was you hear this for 3 years straight, and you're thinking, oh, look at all these changes they're going to
Yeah,
do.
okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I have a theory, and I don't know if it's well founded or not, but I think some of the recent troubles we had with the sexual abuse crisis was kind of rooted in that.
Oh,
Was that you started hearing these things about, oh, priestly celibacy, we're going to get rid of that. And women ordination, cool. And, even homosexuals coming into the priesthood.
yeah.
All right,
Could be.
cool.
Okay.
So what you I think happened was a lot of people started looking at those things, and maybe had men enter the seminary and women enter the convent maybe shouldn't have.
Thinking.
And once they got promulgated, they said, oh no, wait a minute, we never got rid of all that. There was a frustration that occurred, right? And so how do I express that,
Yeah,
right?
that's an interesting thought.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, no,
I don't
that's,
know.
I think too that, the world that so many people before my generation grew up in, especially here in St. Louis, was a very Catholic world. I even remember, I grew up in a little subdivision over there on the other side of Highway 70 that I'm gonna guesstimate 85 to 90% of the people in that subdivision were Catholic and came to church here at St. Anne's. I mean, on Sunday morning,
Sure.
the neighborhood was empty because
Yeah.
people were at church and they were here. And so all of a sudden, when I was 17 and I moved, which was a really interesting move because we moved to West County and I went to school at Parkway Central. Well, Parkway Central is about a third to a half Jewish, and it still is.
Yeah.
And wonderful experience.
Yeah.
I really was a really great experience. I had never, I grew up in this little Catholic world,
Right.
and I had never met a Jewish
Yeah.
person before.
Yeah.
So it was like, oh my gosh. Matter of fact, I dated a Jewish girl
Yeah.
for a little while in high school, But, I think we as Catholics lived in this closed world.
Oh, for sure.
And then when Vatican II changed things, there was also the media.
Right.
You can, even back when we were younger, you could still turn on the television and see every kind of preacher that was willing
Yeah.
to buy time speak.
Mm-hmm.
And I've listened to many Protestant preachers because they're not, you know, I'm not gonna sit here and say, well, they're Protestant, I can't listen to them.
sure.
No, they're talking about Jesus too, I'm not gonna, you know, but I think as Catholics, most Catholics have kind of lost the line between Catholicism and the Protestant stuff.
There may be some truth
Because you're
there.
so exposed to it.
Well, and I mean, we also live, I mean, this is still a Protestant country.
Right.
I mean, this was founded by Protestants. I
Yeah.
mean, even though the middle Midwest and also the West and the South was all founded by the Franciscans and the Jesuits, but
Well, that's true.
but you know, the culture comes from
But you're right,
East
it's-
where the British
it's-
came. Yeah, so
yeah.
so you know, this is after the Reformation, and so yeah, there was a lot of Protestant influence here in the United States that melded in some ways, especially during like the 20th century and the 18th century. I'm sorry, 19th, 20th century with a lot of the immigrants coming in. So there was almost this like this, how do we fit all these things in? And yeah, there may be an influence both ways.
Yeah.
Right. But to that point, I mean, yeah, I think you're right that even after Vatican, I mean, I live in a neighborhood the same way. We all went to Catholic school. We all lived in the neighborhood. It wasn't until I was like 10 I realized my next door neighbor was Russian Orthodox and was like, oh, they're not that far off. So, you know, so whatever. So I mean, but in reality, we all kind of profess the same thing. We all felt the same thing. We all worship the same God. So cool. But yeah, I think that's when I will say, like, when I was growing up though, the music that was being used, now that part of that could have been the capability of the people, I don't know, but it was very lacking. And it was not fulfilling. And I don't think it was necessarily liturgical nor beautiful when I was growing up. Like I would hear, like, we're talking about their Lord of the Dance and Canticle of the Sun and these other that they're now are saying, those probably wouldn't be that
shouldn't
great.
be used during mass.
And now I'm glad they did because, but then again, maybe it was about 40 years too late because I have entire generations who've gone through these things and maybe fallen away because of it.
Yeah.
I mean,
never know.
I think if it weren't for talking about if I didn't have a non-musical mass at my parish, I don't know if I'd be going to church all that often.
Yeah,
Those things.
that's, there's because obviously that's what this whole program with all this consolidation is all about. We're, we do hope to believe that we can reinvigorate our
Right.
church here in St. Louis. I
Right.
mean, we're all scratching our heads what to do because I always keep telling myself that evangelization anymore is not knocking on doors. You don't have to leave your family.
Yeah.
You don't have to leave your family.
That's true.
We all have families that are, we all came from these Catholic families that now I'm one of 5.
Mm-hmm.
My sister and I go to church, so there's 3 of them, that were
Yeah.
raised in the same house I
Right.
was, but
Right.
they just, for whatever reason, and that is the hardest part to evangelize. I have even prayed about it and have asked myself, I need to go to my 3 brothers and actually have a serious conversation with them and say, hey, I'm not trying, but I just, what happened to you in the church?
Right.
And that to me is the hardest kind of evangelization, to talk to your own family, but.
Well, right, and I think the kind of getting back to talking about the music. I mean, I'm actually kind of happy the bishops did this because this clear. And I think that's probably part of the problems here is that after. I think the reason why we see people started falling away because there wasn't that clarity anymore.
Things became muddy.
Right.
So
what is a lot? What is good? What isn't? I mean,
Yeah.
even talking about beauty. I mean, I think sometimes we have an understanding that beauty is subjective, and there's some truth. I mean, there's taste, but there is an objectivity to beauty,
That's a good point.
right? That if people look at beauty, they can tell what it is.
Yeah.
The idea of the true, the good, and the beautiful, and that they are one and the same, really, or they're different aspects of the same thing.
Very much.
And that if you see something beautiful, that what you're seeing is goodness, and what you're seeing is truth,
right,
and that if truth is objective and beauty and goodness is objective, then it follows.
Now,
that-
well, to that point, we study in seminary a class called metaphysics. I know Renee knows that because you don't know about that. But metaphysics is a philosophical class that talks about meta just means beyond the physical, right? So in other words, there's like a overarching, guide. We would say that's God theologically, but using like the true, the good, and the beautiful, those are what we call they're all synonymous with God, right? They call them the transcendental. So the good, the unifying, the true, the harmonious, right?
Okay.
And now beauty, Thomas Aquinas say beauty is a transcendental. I'd agree with them. I think that's kind of true. But traditionally, there's about 5, right? So the unifying, the good, the true, the harmonious, and oh man, what was the last one? Really, it's been a long time since I took philosophy. But anyway, these are all. If you say these things, you're actually saying God, because He is those things. He's the one that transcends all those things.
Yeah,
right?
he transcends.
Philosophically
all that.
speaking.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, but that's what I'm saying. We would say that there's definitely an objective beauty as there is an objective God. I think Thomas would argue that. Thomas Aquinas would argue that in the Summa. And so, and I think that's what I'm saying. Like, I could hear a Reckless Love. I hear that on the radio. Oh, it's a beautiful song. It really speaks to me personally. But again, is that objective enough to say this is proper to this particular aspect of worship? Is it a worship song?
Should it
something
be part of your
towards what's
mass?
going on in the mass?
I mean, if you're listening to it on your CD player in the car, great, but
Right.
it shouldn't be on Sunday at Mass.
Right.
That makes sense, yeah. This is kind of opening up a whole new window for me, because I've never thought about any of that stuff, I just don't,
Well, I don't think you're alone on that, Mike. I think
a lot of people think about it.
And I think that's why we have discussion, because I mean, I will say, it's been my experience not only as a layperson, but as a seminarian, as a deacon, as a priest. The most divisive topic when it comes to any parish is the music they use in the liturgy.
Is it really? Okay, I guess.
And it's always comes down to subjective. I like this better. Well, okay, but is that liturgical?
Yeah.
Is that musical? Is it actually in line with
Right.
what is it theologically sound? Right.
And it and I'll say that because of that and the attitude that the music we should have in the liturgy is the music that I like, and all these other considerations are not important. I'm slightly more pessimistic than you are, Father, that a document like that will do any good, because if you say, well, okay, but here's what the guidelines say, you'll be fine. Well, then to hell with the guidelines, basically.
Well, or you'll be labeled as like a liturgical Nazi, or
Yeah.
a stickler or something. So
Yeah.
it's like I said, it's to me it's always a losing argument when it comes to music.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things also losing arguments when it comes to liturgy too.
Well, I one of the things that I've been so impressed with you, Father, in the short time you've been here, is that you back up what you say with the reason. And I guess I've been around a lot of great priests, but an awful lot of them are also because I said so type of,
Well, and I think also to kind of give
young,
some maybe some what did you say?
I said you're still young, give him time.
Maybe that's true. I mean, you're right. I mean, I've been being down for maybe 20 years.
Wait till becomes a pastor. Wait till he's a pastor.
yeah, well,
That's true. As associate, there's a lot of that's my problem.
Parochial administrator,
the system to beat you down.
But I think to give some maybe I guess kind of like give some charity to my brothers who are a little bit older. I think talking about Vatican II, I think the problem with that lack of clarity was that the priests, the bishops, and everyone else clergy were in the same boat.
Right.
So I mean, I remember I was talking to somebody. I can't remember. It was something about maybe it was about confession, or I can't remember what exactly it was talking. But this person went to the priest, and the priest really gave kind of a very unfulfilling response, and it was just more like kind of more brushing off as like more I said because I said so.
Yeah.
And my response is, well, that's probably because he didn't actually understand the reasoning behind it, because it probably was somewhat kind of muddy at the time before there was actually the development that we have today. Yeah. And so I can give a little charity and say, well, I can understand his circumstance. I mean, you're talking about there's this council that happened where there seems like there's going to be a lot of these changes, and people are coming to me and asking me, is there a shepherd, is there a priest? Hey, what's going to happen with this? What's going to do this?
Yeah.
Well, I'll just do this and we'll figure it out.
We'll go from there. Yeah.
I mean, I can understand it because there's a humility involved with saying, I really don't know. I can go find out. I may not actually give you an answer.
But everybody,
I don't know.
as the flock, we expect Father to have all the answers.
Right.
You
Right.
know, you went to isn't there a big book over at Directory where you just look that up, or isn't there a website where you just
Here's the
type
thing.
in and
There's
I-
100 books.
Yeah, right, exactly.
It's part of the
Yeah.
problem.
Every RCA class I've ever actually come
Okay.
into, my first thing I tell them is, look, if you have a question, I may not know the answer, but I'll at least know maybe where I can go look, and I'll do that, right?
I
But
think
I
the
don't.
book is right next to the how to be a parent.
Right.
Well, there you
right.
go. That's a great
It's right
example.
next
to
That's
it.
a great
It's right
example.
next
Yeah.
to
So I mean, that's the thing. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a lot of things the church teaches definitively, but actually, there's a lot the church doesn't teach definitively.
Yeah.
I mean, today is a perfect example for today for Our Lady of Guadalupe, right? The church teaches that you can have a devotion to this, but it doesn't definitively say it's actually
It happened.
the dogmatic,
Yeah, it's
right?
not,
It's
yeah.
not well, maybe.
I mean, it certainly has brought.
It's
certainly is
worthy
brought-
of belief.
It's
Is
worthy
that-
of belief, but you don't
that's the
have to
term.
believe
It's
it,
brought-
right?
It's a
It's
term of
brought-
art.
Yeah.
It's brought hundreds of millions of people,
Well,
you know,
right.
into the church.
But, and
I
I,
mean, you know.
I personally, I think there's a lot of good evidence to show
Yeah.
that it's actually happened. It actually
Wow.
truly is a miracle. But you don't have to believe it to call yourself Catholic,
No.
right?
No.
And there's a lot of those things out there that the church says, well, yeah, you can have some devotion to this, but you don't have to believe it. Don't want to.
Well, and that's what I think frustrates some people because they think they have to know all this
Mhm.
stuff to get to heaven. And sometimes I had at my house for, oh gosh, almost 15 years, a Tuesday night prayer group, okay? And there was generally 5, 7, 10 men there from Holy Trinity. And matter of fact, when Father Paul Neiman was here, he used to show up every week. And you know, we would get into these discussions, and some of these guys would be really frustrated because they didn't know this stuff.
Yeah.
I was never taught this. I went to a
Yeah.
Catholic school. Nobody ever taught me.
Right.
And sometimes you would just have to stop and go, you know, there's not going to be a 50-page test when
Yeah.
you get to heaven.
Yeah.
When your final judgment comes,
Right.
the parameters that your life needs to be lived under are in, you know,
Yeah, I
it's a
mean,
short. you
Love
know,
God, love your neighbor.
yeah,
Right?
I mean,
That's what it basically
well,
comes
you know,
down
I
to.
mean, you don't
Right.
want to seem curt, you know,
Yeah.
but that's,
Right.
Right.
you know, you not knowing why the liturgical music doesn't fit,
Now,
doesn't.
yeah, but here might be the difference though. So for those with holy orders, right?
Yeah,
The church does teach this. The
you,
pastor will be judged
Okay.
on how well they bring people closer to
okay,
Jesus.
so, well,
Right.
that's, okay.
So I mean it's
That's
a
your
responsibility,
job.
right?
Yeah,
And so that's why I can have a little more compassion with these priests around the time of Vatican
Sure.
II, saying like,
yeah.
I get it, you know. I mean, even that I didn't realize that it was even a thing until I looked up the internet stuff. It's like, oh, wow, how about that? How about whatever?
Just like all the priests that say, when I got out of the seminary, I didn't realize I'd be talking about boilers.
Well,
for
yeah,
half of my
yeah, well,
life,
that's
too.
true. I mean,
I didn't know what a
yeah.
I didn't know what a boiler was
Yeah.
till I became an associate pastor.
Well,
It's
fortunately,
like,
the
you know,
engineer in me kind of had at least some background on that. But you know, but
No,
still,
I know.
yeah.
Oh,
but-
I think I told you the comment I made when I heard you were going to be pastor. I said, "Oh, we'll finally have somebody that knows what's wrong with the boiler." I was being kind of flip, but I thought, well, Father will have a little bit of, you know.
Could be many things, Mike. Could be many
No,
things.
I just thought.
But I think that's the idea behind a lot of these things that when it comes to certain things like being taught, like I went K through 12 Catholic school, and it wasn't until I was in college until I actually because I was oppressed on it about the real presence of the Eucharist. Now I'm willing to say and sure that at some point in my career as a student in Catholic school, it was told me that this is the body, blood, soul, and Jesus Christ, real presence. It's truly Jesus. Great. But if I'm 7 and I have other things to worry about, like what's going to be on Nickelodeon tonight,
Right, and that,
right?
and that's unfortunately when you were taught a lot
Right.
of that stuff. I have come up with that same theory that so much of that stuff that's important, I was taught when I was in 1st and 2nd grade. And like you
Right.
said, your world's about this big in 1st
Right.
and 2nd grade.
Right.
You're you know,
Well,
you know.
And to be fair, I don't think we as a church do a good job of fostering that because as we do, I think we do a great job as Catholic schools to teach the math and science and reading and these really good things you need to know intellectually. But I don't think we take the same approach we do to the faith. And the reason I can show as evidence for that is not only my own education. It was interesting that every year our textbooks for these different subjects got more advanced. Where it seems like the religion book
It's the same
stayed the
old,
same.
Same old.
Meaning it was more like a comic book. It was more like kind of like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, how do you feel about this? You know,
Or that was the class that was skipped.
or right. And so
Oh,
you
okay,
know,
that's an interesting.
so I mean, to that end, when we're talking about people who are growing intellectually, physically, how much are people actually growing spiritually?
Good, yeah.
And so I think when I talk to the 7th, 8th graders about confirmation, the first thing I tell them is, look, this is not the end. You're not graduating.
You're not graduating yet.
This is supposed to be the beginning of
And
a
unfortunately,
lifelong
that is what
pursuit.
happens a lot
Exactly.
of times.
I mean,
yeah.
because as you grow intellectually, you should grow spiritually, and
Yeah.
part of that is learning about the faith,
Yeah.
right? But we don't necessarily, I think, promote that very well.
No.
In our not only our textbooks but also maybe even our classes. I think
Yeah.
I will say I think I've been very impressed with the teachers here at St. Anne and at my former parish of St. Gabriel. I think they really do well, but unfortunately I don't know why we're not looking at deep better resources
Form, yeah.
for these people to
yeah.
help with those
And,
things.
You know, so yeah, we've got a lot of places to
Mm-hmm.
to examine and kind of be self-critical.
Right.
You know, like
Right.
maybe we're not.
Which I think is why when you have when you only have maybe a 7th and 8th grade spiritual mentality or maturity,
That's a good point.
that's when you start looking at these things. Well, who cares about that stuff? You know?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, the church does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are all these documents.
I think of my own faith journey through my life and where there were these big hit me in the head things that happened that I was sometimes 40, 45, 50 years old. And it's like, where was this all my time? I must have been being told this, but it wasn't clicking with
For
me.
me, it was the
you know?
seminary.
You were
Honestly,
worried about puberty at
I'm
that
telling you,
point.
Mike, when I got to the seminary, one thing that I really appreciate about Kenrick here, and I'll say this you'll never say anything against the formation that you received there. Spiritually, intellectually,
Really
pastorally,
Did a good job, huh?
they have an amazing faculty and staff, right? Present company included, of course. But that's what I'm saying. It is kind of frustrating because it's like, well, where was all this stuff? Was it taught to me?
Did I miss it?
Did I
Or,
miss
yeah.
it? But I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, it's more advanced study.
Your heart wasn't.
Well, I
right.
I think
think
that's right.
Your
I
heart
think that's
wasn't
right.
Yeah, and I
Some
think
kids
even
do
when
get
you're
it.
when you're in school, you've got, all the other things you're learning too.
Yes.
And,
Well, I would tell you, I felt so. I was the oldest one in my class. I was one of the oldest seminarians.
sure,
in most
yeah,
of the seminary.
yeah.
And it was very humbling to have a classmate like a Father Tony Ritter or a Father Andrew Auer or these guys that come out of high school and they have a not only deeper prayer life but also a deeper intellectual understanding of these
At
things
that age,
than me, right? And these
Yeah.
are these are 20-year-olds just got out of high school.
Yeah.
I was 33, and it's like, oh,
Right.
well, okay, And I appreciate them because I learned a lot from them.
oh, okay,
Right,
That's-
but it is like, oh boy, wow, where have I been?
yeah, you wonder where that all
Mhm.
was,
But I think if those moments where it does hit you and that sort of thing, and you take the opportunity to learn from it, that's really admirable. To be humbled by it and not push it away.
Yeah,
I mean, I'll say from my own experience that so we had the same sort of music that I guess you had growing up, but it was done really well, and so I don't, and I guess I have a better attachment to that sort of thing than I might. But when I learned about not the rich the treasures of the church, as we say, the rich musical tradition and and the tradition of music in the liturgy and just how much there is there that had completely blown over my head. I felt like it was like a heritage of mine that I had been denied somehow, and that I was only just now discovering. Like it's like discovering that your great grandfather was Napoleon or something like that, and it's like, oh really? That's what we are. That's who we are.
First time I heard Adoro de te devote.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, where is this? I mean, and this is a Aquinas hymn
Mm-hmm.
that's been around for now at that point 800 years, And it's like, wow. The first time you hear that, it's like, this is amazing, right? And you put that up against some of the secular, even like Reckless Love or something. It's like, oh, it doesn't even compare.
Well, what happens
Doesn't
too is,
compare.
and what happens too is you sometimes get an attitude of whatever's old is passed
It's
on.
right. You're right. It's
We've
right.
advanced past.
It's,
that.
it's antiquated.
Which,
Yeah.
by the way, is a ultimately self-defeating mode of selecting music, because what seems old now to me is a song like
Yeah.
"Blessed Be the Lord."
Yeah.
Well, see,
Yeah.
that's funny because like, it's always kind of interesting when I ask people like what their taste in music is. Like when it comes to church, and oftentimes I know Mike and I talked about this before, but like a lot of times the answer you get is I like the more traditional stuff. Good, okay, and so then you have to go like, what do you mean by
What do
that?
you call it
Right,
traditional?
exactly.
Yeah.
What do you mean by traditional? And then
Yeah.
so that's when you start getting like, oh yeah, like Canticle of the Sun and On Eagle's Wings is like, oh, okay, all right, okay, yeah,
It's,
yeah,
Glory and praise.
right, you're right, yeah,
it's
Right.
not as old as you think
Right.
it is.
Right, but it's
For them, it's tradition.
Right.
yeah. Well, it's kind of before what, I guess in that case traditional is before what you grew up with. I think a lot of people, what the music that they like is the music that they grew up with,
Right.
which is understandable.
Well, you
I
got-
mean, I still have
The singing Jesuits.
yeah.
That
The
was,
single
that
digits,
was going to be my
yeah.
point.
I mean, I'll be honest. I
was
still kind of like On Eagle's Wings and stuff like that.
Well,
It's fine.
Well, also too, and this
Wait.
is also kind of scandalous in some ways. Like for instance, I didn't bring my breviary with me, but there's a few composers in the breviary who left the priesthood,
Okay.
Mhm.
right? And they were priests, they were whatever, and
Yeah.
they did the music, and it's sort of like then someone's like, well, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but to
Yeah.
tell you the truth, I don't actually appreciate that music anyway.
Okay. So.
And so every time it comes in the breviary, it's almost like a penance. It's like, okay, let's,
We know what that's
or I try to find an alternative.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's, you have to look at these things and kind of put them in the context too, I think, in some ways.
So do our hymnals upstairs, are they under the lens of this?
I don't know if all the songs in there
Do we have to
do.
go tear some pages out?
Yeah,
Get some
we've
volunteers.
been talking about
Exact
that. I
night.
guess I'll put it that way. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
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 We've been in some discussions about
Okay.
what maybe to do. I mean, so part of this also practically speaking is, okay, well, we have these certain hymnals that are paid for already. We don't have to pay anything more. Okay. But is it really proper for now? I think I've taken the approach, I'm open to suggestions as far as what would be more in line with liturgy, what the church wants for us. And if it's a one-time cost, great, right? Let's try to look at those things. And if we have to get rid of something up there, okay, fine. In the meantime, let's do what we can to actually make sure the liturgy is proper to the liturgy, which means maybe we don't use all the songs in that hymnal, but use those we can. And part of the struggle there would be is, okay, when we're talking about in line with liturgy, part of that also is in line with the prayers, the season, the actual readings, right? And I think Mike does a great job of choosing those that are in line with those things. But that's gonna be a challenge because sometimes there's whole sections in some of these hymnals. It's like, well, some of these lyrics are kind of iffy, and so it can be a struggle. It can be a challenge. It can be a challenge.
And then you got the fact that they spent a lot of money for those books. Those are
Right.
very expensive
Right.
books, and
Right.
everybody kind of thought we buy these books, we're
And
set
that's
for
it.
life,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
unfortunately things change and
Right.
move, and
Right.
it's
And so I think we can be open to what would be more in line.
yeah.
And so part of that is not a tomorrow thing. It's not going to be a next week thing. It's
Is
probably going to be a little while
is
to
the
figure that out.
music that's with the series, the books like that, that change twice a year?
Oh, the
the
Days
prayer.
Missals.
Is
and
that
the-
music kind of updated from these standpoints?
I don't know if all of them. So I think I think what happens, and Mike can probably speak more intelligently to this. I think what ends up happening is you have a lot of these publishers that kind of use a lot of the same composers, the same stuff.
Okay, I
right?
got you.
Now some is unique, but for the most part,
Are those?
would you say that's accurate?
Pretty much, yeah. GIA had so the two big music publishers for Catholic liturgical music are OCP, Oregon Catholic Press,
Okay,
and GIA in Chicago, which stands for the Gregorian Institute of America.
okay.
But they each have their own sort of composers that they publish, but they also license from each other.
Okay.
So if you look at a
So
GIA
you get a
hymnal
pretty good,
and an OCP hymnal, there's a lot of overlap. There will be songs that are unique to but like the really something like I said, On Eagle's Wings, like on Eagle's Wings is going to be in a lot of those hymnals from both publishers.
I didn't think you could have a Catholic burial without it. Isn't that kind of?
You can, trust me.
I know.
when,
I'm being
I don't
facetious.
want that at my funeral.
So NPM, the National Pastoral Musicians, they last had their meeting here in 2014, or the convention in 2014, and I went to that because it was in town, and I was also just kind of getting started out as a music minister, and they had a workshop on funeral music, and I forget what they actually called it, but the presenter said, I was really tempted to call it Off Eagle's Wings. So then, okay.
But no, I mean, that kind of thing, though, I mean, like that song, yeah, you're right. I mean, many people use that.
I heard it practically every funeral I go to.
And I tell you what, as someone who celebrates a lot of funerals, it does get grating, right? I mean, it's just like, if I can hear that one more time, I'm gonna, I don't know, go bang my head against the tree for a few hours, right? So I mean, but to that point, I mean, that's the thing. I think that what that goes to show is how limited we are in our understanding of these things, and how maybe lacking we are in those treasures of the church and being exposed to them. You know, I mean, like I said, I don't think I was exposed to a lot of these things until I was in the seminary, and you're starting to think like, wow, why? Because it's not like it's anything that's like really kind of can't be done.
Yeah, it's not.
You
It's
know,
not blatant. Like,
Exactly.
Yeah, it's
right.
not. He's not.
I mean, it's not like you have to have like someone with like this overabundant amount of talent to like do these things. Like chanting is really not that difficult. Right? I mean, it really, when you think about it, it's really not that hard.
No, it's not a real.
And there's some people that may be a little tone deaf, but I mean, that's where chant can actually help in some ways. Well, you especially have epiphany, right? So I mean, it just kind of depends. But I think that's the sad thing about these things, that you get a funeral, get a wedding, you'll get whatever, and you hear the same old stuff over again. And what that goes to show is that you just haven't been exposed to these things.
Yeah. Well, and isn't there the books that the church has? There's the funeral book and the wedding book that Father will give you and say, here, pick out your stuff.
So that has the readings.
Right, but I thought it had songs in it.
Well,
too.
not the ones I've seen.
I mean, that you might get the parish might have, okay, here's a list of songs
Yeah.
that we've used before, because a lot of times it's the presider, whoever's guiding the funeral planning for the family. It's like, well, here, you can pick out some music. Well, they don't want to think about that.
And to that point too, I think that also kind of depends on whoever the capability.
Sure.
Right. I mean, so like I know like a lot of places, St. Anne included, we have a choir that's more volunteer, right? And part of that is, well, what is the capability of the choir to actually sing some of this
Some of that
stuff,
stuff,
right?
sure.
So you have to take into consideration, I think.
And you get some of the parishes that are bigger parishes, especially you go out west, and
Right.
they've got groups of people
sure.
that just sing at funerals.
Sure.
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
Because they're available during
Right.
the week. They're retired people, and there
Right.
may be 6 or 8 of them, and they're like, hey, we got our own little funeral group here, and we'll sing at
Well, even
funerals,
I know certain parishes in the South County have that
It's
too.
the same deal. Yeah,
right,
and
yeah.
you got enough retired folks that can sing, and they're
Mhm.
like, okay, we'll take care of all the funerals. So the regular music minister, because nobody gets rich being a music minister, right, Mike?
Right.
you gotta have a job too.
Right.
There's that,
Yeah,
but,
well.
yeah, but that I've heard that so many places though. You go there, you can tell this is a little group that just
Yeah.
kind of they take care of the funerals during
Right.
the week, and it kind of, but I don't know. Most people don't realize. I think a lot of people sing songs and don't even pay attention to what they're singing.
Probably
It's in the book. It's in church.
Right.
It must be.
Oh no, I think
yeah,
it's a great assumption. I think a lot of people make the assumption. I
Yeah,
mean,
I mean,
it's in the hymnal, so
it's
it's
in the church. I mean,
that's right.
I'm sure Father read this thing from
Yeah,
cover
sure,
to
yeah,
cover
right,
and,
yeah, right.
and proofread it and
Well,
had
and
it reprinted, and
And that what's interesting is we talked a little bit about the concept of active participation. So one might be tempted to think that if you're singing as you described, that evinces active participation. But if you're not engaging in the text or engaging in the liturgical
In other
action,
words, thinking about
then
what
that's
you're
not
saying.
then that's not active participation. That is activity.
And sometimes active participation is just like listening and receiving what's being sung
Yeah.
too. I mean, because there are
Yeah.
certain times in liturgy there are certain songs that are really more designed towards like more like a cantor or maybe a scola instead of like the
Right.
entire congregation
Target.
singing.
That Sing to the Lord document, I was
Right.
rereading it, and they said, yeah, sometimes it does mean encouraging singing in the congregation, but it was quite explicit in saying that, yeah, no, sometimes active participation means, when it comes to music, means sitting and listening to what's being sung and internalizing it in a meaningful
Yeah,
way.
right. Yeah.
So, I was-
Which is also, I think, kind of novel.
Mhm.
Because a lot of people, like we're talking about, like they assume, like, oh, I'm just going to sing everything.
I was
Don't
taught,
worry
I was taught,
Or
I
if
remember
I'm
being-
not singing, then
Right,
something's
something's
wrong.
wrong, right.
I
Or if
remember
don't know
being
it,
taught by the
something's
sisters that
Yeah.
you sing in church.
Right.
God
Well,
doesn't
and,
care.
you know,
God doesn't
Right.
just distinguish between a person with a good voice and a bad voice. We want to
Sure.
hear
Right.
you sing in church.
Sure.
You know.
wrong. Yeah, and I do think singing should be encouraged.
Yeah.
That everybody has a voice, and as you say, it's not. There's a G.K. Chesterton line about G.K. Chesterton likes singing and apparently wasn't that good a singer, and said something. And he has a line, something along the lines of it used to be that every man sung, but now men do not sing on the absurd grounds that they are not good at it. So yes, everybody should lift their voice and sing in due course, and I think like things like the processionals or with the ordinaries of the mass, so like the Gloria and the Holy, like those are clear opportunities for congregational singing. But there are other times where if it's a song you don't know and you're not comfortable singing it, well then take the opportunity to listen to it and think, oh, well, why is this here? What is this saying to me now? And how does it convey the liturgical action?
I think
the
Greg's,
Gloria and the Holy, 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 and those are also prayers. So
Yeah,
you
yeah.
sing those because you're praying. You don't
Right,
have to sing
yeah,
the songs.
right.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, Augustine says, singing is like praying twice, right?
Right.
I mean, but like I said, like I think another example of that where it's more like kind of more conducive just to kind of listen is sometimes during the offertory.
Mhm.
Because there are actions going on, there's things happening there, which actually is participatory of the congregation.
Mhm.
That if you're not necessarily, paying attention to that and maybe singing,
You miss
you're
what's
kind of
going
missing
on.
those things.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah.
That's a good point.
I tend to think of the spoken parts of the liturgy as sort of a way of thinking about what active participation means, because there are times where the congregation is supposed to speak in one voice, and there are times when the congregation should definitely not be.
Right.
If they were reading along aloud with the gospel or something like that would not be active participation. That would be wholly inappropriate. But if you're sitting there listening to the gospel, then that is active participation.
Right.
That's like a couple. I think I've had 2 priests in my life actually discourage people from reading the read from.
Oh, from even
They
reading.
want you to stand and listen to the reading, and my excuse on that is sometimes I can't understand the person reading very well, and I
Yeah.
don't want to.
Well, with our sound system currently. Yeah.
Well,
Well, I've heard a lot of people from the EMBO.
Might be our
fine.
ears.
Yeah.
I tell you what,
I think it's the ears.
I have found
Older we get,
that
harder it is to-
part of the problem is people don't take advantage of the best sound in our church. The best sound in our church is I've found the sweet spots about the 5th pew, and unfortunately nobody sits there.
Yeah.
And so if they're beefing about sound, that's their own fault, because that sweet spot is right in there. Because I've looked for it. I'm deaf in one ear, so I've worked my way around the church, and that 5th row for me is about just right. And I've told people that. I said, well, you're sitting in row number 60.
Well,
back
we also
there.
have back in the sacristy listening aids.
You guys have the listening.
We do have a
aids?
few.
Yeah.
I think we have like 4.
Yeah.
But then again, I don't know if that's going to be able to help
No.
everybody. But yeah, I mean, part of that too is we've been talking about possibly getting a sound engineer or someone in to
Kinda
kind of
get
take a look at
See if
what
things
we can
could
do, right.
be tweaked.
But
for-
I think that's also a part of it too. I mean, a lot of the times when I get someone come to talk to me about that, it's more, they're elderly, they're probably not
Yeah.
hearing very well anyway, and so it's like, well, should we redesign everything?
Are you going to redesign
Right,
everything for very few
right,
people?
yeah.
You know, I mean, you can.
So,
Just enunciate better.
yeah.
Yeah, I wondered, like you say, is this really just a real minority of people that
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about like those that can't hear. Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
well,
it was-
but then again, on Wednesday morning for the children's mass, I sit back about row 30 back there, and you know what? I hear okay there. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Well, one thing I've been trying to do is like kind of try and find different the lapel mic different ways.
see where you're
Yeah, because like, but it's funny. No matter what I do, seems like there's always somebody like, I didn't really hear it well. Like,
Yeah.
well then okay.
Well, you tell them to go to row 5, and
Yeah.
row 5 is the hot spot. That's the hot spot. I used to laugh because this
You're
friend
in
of
the
mine
paired row.
who's passed away.
We
We, used to
labeled
go,
that
we
way.
went to Holy Trinity.
Mhm.
He was
like
hard. He
sweet
had a lot of
spot
hearing
better.
problems, and he had his seat. And he got to church 30 minutes early because it was like row 6 on the left side, and that's where he could hear mass. And I mean,
Right.
he got there early because he wanted to make sure that
Okay.
he was in here, and that on his part was very good that
Yeah.
he found his spot and sat there, and I think sometimes people, well, if you're having problems, move around a little
Yeah.
bit. Maybe
Yeah.
there is a sweet spot.
Well,
where-
there's also a lot of, I mean,
Yeah.
leather spots.
yeah,
Good.
wine.
Well, anything else? I think we covered quite. Any questions you guys have, or anything you guys?
I was
Well-
gonna question that, this is every first Tuesday.
Okay, so Friends, Food, and Faith, which is what this is,
Yes.
is going to be every first Tuesday. Now we're doing it this week because last week I had some other obligation.
Okay,
Okay.
But from here on out, it'll be the first Tuesday.
First
and
of
then
the
the
month.
remaining Tuesdays,
Are called Bother the Fathers,
Okay.
right?
Okay,
So
yeah.
we're gonna. That's more of an open discussion.
okay.
So
Whatever
Bother
you
the
got.
Father's a little more informal. You
Yes.
can come in with,
Whatever we want to talk about.
hey, Father, why is the Vatican blue?
Correct.
Or, yeah,
Yes.
that's
I don't know. Next question.
Well,
Yeah, 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 right,
hey.
I mean, so yeah, I mean, again, I always tell, I'm going to do the best I can. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you.
I'll get you. I'm just
You
going
know.
to come in and ask you what the stained glass means upstairs. You that'll.
I got a paper. That
Well,
one. Yeah.
well, it's funny because we used to come here. St. Anne was our default church for a long time because my wife has a hard time getting going in the morning.
Sure.
And if we'd missed 10 o'clock mass, this was the only 11 o'clock mass within miles. And we used to come, and I like coming over here because I grew up here. So
Right.
we'd come over here, and one week back around 18 or 19, Father Nick made his homily about the stained glass
yeah.
window. And it was, and for somebody that sat there as a kid, looked at that thing all
Yeah.
those years and had no idea what that was all about. And
Awesome.
yeah. It was pretty interesting that he
We
kind
had
of
somebody in here once,
Did a whole talk.
the whole presentation on it with
Okay.
the pointer.
Oh, really?
That's-
Showing the different
Well,
parts.
I know. I've read that sheet a couple times
Yeah.
now, and it has like the symbolism and
Yeah.
everything on it. And yeah, I mean, it's.
But I know
you
there's a
can see
lot
it.
more details than that.
It's unique.
I still, I forgot what the tools in the right-hand corner are about. Is that-
Yeah, that was. I forgot. It's on there. It's on that thing I have.
And see,
yeah.
I don't know.
I couldn't find it, but when I was a kid growing up at home, we had Encyclopedia Britannica, okay, the big, not, the big thick one.
Yeah.
And under architecture, there's a picture of that window in that
Yeah.
encyclopedia. And
Yeah.
it was in, I believe my parents bought it around 1966, and I had made,
Yeah. At the time, apparently, when that was designed, that was
Oh.
like a
Yeah.
one of the prominent. It was actually like in a bunch of magazines.
yeah,
and-
well, if you
yeah,
think
right.
about it, it's got that modern,
Yeah.
art
Yeah.
looking deal, and I mean,
Right.
yeah, it's, I heard a comment from somebody a couple weeks ago with one of the folks from over a presentation. He goes, "If I ever win the lottery," he goes, I'm gonna pay the church to cover that." So there was another end of the spectrum,
Yeah. Yeah.
But what I've been telling people, I said, we need to go to different masses.
Mhm.
And now in the winter, since the sun is in the south, at 11 o'clock mass, I was going to communion the other day, and there was it caught some of the right glass up there in the corner that I had never seen before. And I mean, the light, it was pretty spooky looking actually, the way the light was coming through there.
Well, there's two things I've kind of brought my attention about that too. Is like I guess on the outside there's been some kind of coating or something.
Over the
that
top
keeps
of it?
Yeah, and then also you got the tree, which blocks a lot
Good
of light
point,
too.
and I,
Yeah.
yeah, because those trees are pretty big, but, yeah, but I noticed just in the last couple of weeks, because I think because that's south that way,
Yeah.
and the sun goes further.
Yeah. Further
the
in the
south,
winter. Yeah. Right.
And communion time at 11 o'clock mass would be about 11:45, so
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
almost at high noon.
That's
when
true. Yeah. So
You got that real good, but I just noticed those colors, they were different than I've noticed since I've been back here, so I I'm telling people.
I always have my back to it, so I can really.
Right, yeah. If I see you turning it on a mass, Father's gonna be up there. Father's gonna be up there going, "Where's that Mike was talking about?"
Maybe we'll do an Oriental mass. No. All right.
Now, have you seen
supposed to be
the portrait of
featured
Saint Anne in
It
the
is,
stairwell
oh,
as you
yeah,
came
bunch,
in?
yeah, bunch.
Uh-huh.
Oh, right
Yeah.
now.
That's an
There's
interesting
gonna be a
story
tour or
because
something
that
coming
was
up here. Yeah.
so the Father Nick would know this more than I do. You're getting a terribly filtered version of what Father Nick knows, who managed to learn a lot about this stuff. So St. Anne's has a connection to Father de Smet
Correct.
of de Smet parish, and who Father de Smet has a whole interesting personal story. Like there's a town in South Dakota called de Smet,
Yeah.
I want to say, that's
Oh, really?
named after
Okay.
him.
Well, he went all the way up to like the
because he
Missouri
went-
River.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he was a missionary figure and was kind of a celebrity in Europe, and so because of his connection to this parish, the King of Belgium gifted us that portrait of Saint Anne
Yeah,
commissioned.
it's actually the
Wow.
plaque
Mhm.
underneath there says, yeah.
I'm gonna take
Yeah,
another
so-
look at that when I go.
Right,
I-
and it's this. I mean, it must have been like an altarpiece for the old church.
Wow.
Yeah, it looks that way, yeah.
Like, it's
Well, I
huge,
wondered. I was
and-
wondering the statuary and those side altars when I was a
Father
kid.
Oh,
Yeah.
When I was
Well,
a
the
kid,
paintings of Saint Anne.
oh,
Yeah.
okay.
when I was a kid, most of those statues weren't in those side altars.
Mhm.
Yeah, and all the way around the church. And I don't know if some of those were stored away somewhere and they pulled them back out. Maybe they were from the old church. I would love. Are there pictures around here of that old church inside?
Well, inside I don't think so. At least I haven't seen. There's a bunch of boxes up in the library that
Really?
I haven't gone through.
Because I'm looking at that and I'm picturing that church must have sat right up against Natural Bridge. You don't see
Yeah,
it there,
right.
but literally
Right.
there had to be, because if you look at the size of the lot out there,
Mhm.
because I understand why they built the church back like
Right.
they did. So, and I don't know when Natural Bridge became a 4-lane road. See, when I was a kid, Natural Bridge was a 4-lane road. They did this boulevard thing about
It's not anymore.
10,
Yeah,
15
yeah,
years
yeah.
ago. But at some point, I'm sure Natural Bridge was a 2-lane road. And I think that church was built around 1900. So
Well, I do know like this outcropping here is all part of the original.
all that
church.
stone is, they
yeah.
saved all that stone.
Yeah.
We were told that when we were kids. That was
Okay.
kind of a legend. But I would love to see different pictures of that with the road out in front of
Yeah,
it.
there
and just,
might be some upstairs, Mike. I
Be
don't know. I
interesting,
have to
right?
go through some of that stuff and see.
Yeah, that'd
I
be-
mean, we were just talking today about we have a bunch of relics up there too.
okay. Oh, really?
Yeah, there's a
Okay.
bunch of relics.
The crucifix was used, the original crucifix of the church was at Good Shepherd.
Oh,
Oh,
I don't know where it went after that, where it is now, but it was a beautiful crucifix. I
Okay.
think that was the original one.
yeah. Okay.
that
see, and I guess during the
Because the-
20s, 30s, and 40s,
They had the church.
the gym was used
Gym.
as a church
Right.
because this church wasn't big enough
Sure.
anymore, so they used them both.
Sure.
When I was a kid in there, it looked more like a church. They've kind of made it look more like a gym now.
Yeah.
It was a gym, but you could tell more when I was a kid that the altar used to be up there and
Oh,
stuff
okay.
like that. There, if you look out on the back walls out there, there's some places where there must have been some stained glass windows. 'cause
Oh,
they're
yeah,
brick-
yeah.
They're
Yeah,
bricked in now.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess they
Well,
decided.
they did have the church in the gym.
Yeah.
when
Yeah,
they
that's
were
what I was
build-
gonna say.
It's about
yeah,
30
yeah,
When
yeah.
they were building.
From
it.
what I understand, about 30 years that was used as a church, and this church was still there,
Yeah.
but they just didn't have the
More
capacity.
overflow. Yeah.
So
Oh,
they
I
did
thought it was
double-
just while they were
double masses. That's-
remodeling.
I find it kind of, I love the history, when you got a place that's this old,
Yeah, sure.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff
Oh, yeah.
that's,
Well,
it's-
and I never realized that the parish, because I mean, you see the building and you think, oh, that must be from the 50s, but then the parish goes back to
It's
1856. It's like, oh,
yeah.
wow,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, for a 150-year-old parish,
Yeah.
it's a pretty
Yeah.
modern looking
Oh,
church.
yeah,
It's like,
right,
yeah,
yeah.
What the heck's going on there, but, yeah.
Well, what we,
Many such cases.
Well,
actually.
Father Nick told
Right,
me that,
Right.
remember the Passionists were here till
Yes.
after World War II.
Right.
Father Nick told me that the Passionists were the ones that hired the architect
Yeah.
to put this together.
Yes.
And
Right.
now, so we're standing there in the middle of church talking about it, and Father Nick goes, now look at this church very carefully. So I look up at it and look at it, he goes, it's kind of shaped like a coffin.
It is,
Yeah.
it's a tomb.
And you got the head. And
Right.
so I never thought.
Percussionist, yeah, kind of makes sense. Yeah, right.
But
yeah.
the architect that did it, I guess, was from Wash U.
Well, he was the same architect that did St. Peter Kirkwood,
Well,
as well as Resurrection. of
the
South
first
City.
time I walked into St. Peter's in Kirkwood, I
Right.
thought, this looks like St.
Yes.
Anne. I mean, it was like,
Yeah,
okay, yeah,
Right.
That's
Yeah,
the church
it's
where I
res-
grew up, and yeah, that style of window is like,
Yeah,
oh yeah, I know
yeah.
that style.
yeah. Is it, and Resurrection's like that too?
Resurrection South City, yeah.
Okay, yeah,
Vietnamese
it's like
prayer. And
that,
so, yeah, same kind of like motifs and everything too, yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know. Well, why don't you go and end with a prayer that we can just
Sure.
sit around and
No,
discuss?
that's fine, yeah.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen.
Amen.
Almighty Father, we thank you for this evening and thank you for the grace you bestowed upon us, the knowledge. We pray that you may bless us as we go further in this Advent season to receive your Son into our hearts. We ask through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
May Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.
Yes, yes.
Cool.
I thought the candlelight mass went well.
I think it went really well.